Maria never imagined her job at the hotel would bring her stories worth remembering. For her, the work was simple: smile at guests, check them in, answer their questions, and make sure everything ran smoothly at the front desk. The hotel wasn't a luxury resort, but it wasn't small either. It stood right in the middle of the city, a place where business travelers, tourists, and the occasional passerby came to rest for a few nights. Maria was good at her job because she treated every guest with kindness, no matter who they were. Some came in tired and grumpy after long flights. Some wanted to talk endlessly at the counter just to pass time. Some were polite but distant, only looking for quick service. Maria handled all of them with the same calm patience. She believed that sometimes a warm smile could mean more to someone than a perfectly folded towel in their room. It was on one of those slow afternoons that she noticed him for the first time. The man arrived with a small suitcase, not the kind that people carry when they plan to stay long, but not so small that it seemed like a quick overnight visit either. He was dressed in a simple gray jacket and dark trousers, nothing flashy. His hair was white, neatly combed, and his eyes looked kind yet a little tired, as though he had carried many years of experiences with him. Maria welcomed him the same way she welcomed everyone. "Good afternoon, sir. Do you have a reservation?" she asked with her polite smile. "Yes, under the name James," he said softly. His voice was gentle, calm, the kind that didn't rush. Maria typed quickly on the computer, found his booking, and handed him the key card. Everything was routine, just like any other guest. But there was something about him that Maria noticed. Even in that short interaction he didn't seem rushed, and he didn't seem distracted like most guests who came straight from the airport or a business meeting. Instead, he looked around the lobby slowly, almost as if he was studying it. After he went upstairs, Maria forgot about him for a while. She had other guests to attend to, phone calls to answer, and schedules to check. But later, when she looked up from her desk, she saw him again. He was sitting quietly in one of the armchairs near the lobby window, a cup of tea in his hand. Most guests didn't spend much time in the lobby unless they were waiting for someone. Yet he sat there, alone, for nearly an hour, looking out at the street, occasionally glancing at the staff working around. At first, Maria thought perhaps he was just lonely. It wasn't uncommon. Hotels often attracted people traveling alone, and sometimes those people liked to linger in common areas to avoid the silence of their rooms. She didn't judge it, she even felt a little sympathy for him. She thought, maybe this man just needed a friendly smile or someone to acknowledge that he wasn't invisible. The next morning, he came down early, before the rush of other guests. He greeted Maria with a small nod, not demanding but polite. He had breakfast in the hotel restaurant but came back to sit in the lobby afterward, again without a clear reason. Maria noticed he wasn't scrolling on a phone or buried in a newspaper like many others would be. He just seemed observant. This pattern continued every time he stayed at the hotel. He wasn't there constantly, but whenever he booked a room, it was usually for a few nights. He didn't ask for special treatment, didn't complain, and didn't act entitled. In fact, Maria thought he was one of the easiest guests to deal with. Yet, his quiet presence made him stand out. Maria, being naturally kind-hearted, started making small efforts to make him feel welcome. She would greet him by name whenever he came down. "Good morning, Mr. James. Did you rest well?" she'd ask with her usual smile. Sometimes he would return the smile and reply, "Yes, thank you." Other times, he'd just nod politely. It wasn't much, but Maria felt that even little gestures mattered for someone who seemed to be alone so often. One evening, as the lobby grew quiet and most guests were already in their rooms, Maria saw him sitting again in the same chair. The dim lights of the lobby reflected on his thoughtful face. She wondered if he had family or friends somewhere, or if this hotel lobby was his only company. She imagined he might be a widower or maybe someone whose children lived far away. She never asked, of course it wasn't her place. But her heart often whispered, he must be lonely. At times, she felt curious. Why did he always come to this hotel? The city had many other places, some cheaper, some more luxurious. Yet he returned here, as though this place held some quiet meaning for him. Maria tried not to think too deeply about it, but whenever she saw him sitting quietly in the lobby, she couldn't help but wonder what story he carried behind those gentle, tired eyes. The other staff didn't pay much attention to him. To them, he was just another guest, quiet, harmless, not troublesome. The housekeeping staff said he left his room in perfect condition, barely using anything. The restaurant staff said he always thanked them for their service but never ordered anything special. He was just, ordinary, at least to everyone else. But for Maria, his presence became familiar. She began to look forward to his check-ins, not because he was exciting or talkative, but because there was something calming about him. He wasn't like the rushed business travelers or demanding tourists. He carried himself with a kind of stillness that was unusual in a busy city hotel. One rainy evening, as Maria stood behind the counter watching raindrops race down the glass doors, she saw him arrive again. His jacket was damp, his suitcase small as usual. When she greeted him, he smiled more warmly than usual, as if recognizing her comforted him. "Good to see you again," he said. The words were simple, but they stayed with Maria long after he had gone up to his room. That night, Maria thought about him while finishing her shift. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a growing curiosity about this man who blended so quietly into the background. She still believed he was just a lonely customer, someone who came here not just for a room, but for the simple company of being surrounded by people. She had no idea then that his story was far bigger than she imagined, and that her small gestures of kindness were quietly shaping the beginning of something she would never forget. Maria had seen many types of guests during her time at the hotel. Some were predictable, some unusual, but none quite like Mr. James. The more often he stayed, the more she noticed small details about him that others overlooked. It wasn't just that he came alone or that he spent hours in the lobby, it was the way he watched things, as though nothing escaped his eye. One morning, after most guests had rushed out to meetings or sightseeing, Maria caught him standing by the reception desk. He didn't need anything. He simply stood there, glancing around at how the staff handled their duties. His gaze moved from the bellboy opening the door for a couple, to the housekeeper quietly pushing her trolley, to Maria herself typing into the computer. His eyes weren't harsh or judgmental, they were calm, but careful. It felt like he was quietly measuring everything around him. Maria found it unusual. Most guests didn't pay attention to the small details of how the hotel worked. They were too busy with their own plans. But Mr. James seemed almost interested in the daily rhythm of the place. When Maria handed him his keycard once, he gave her a small nod and asked, "Do you enjoy working here?" The question surprised her. Guests rarely asked about her feelings, they were usually more concerned about their own comfort. She smiled politely and replied, "Yes, I do. It keeps me busy, and I meet many different people." He studied her for a moment, as though her answer mattered to him in a way she didn't understand. Then he simply said, "That's good," and walked away. As days passed, Maria noticed this pattern more clearly. He seemed to take note of everything: the time it took for room service to arrive, the way receptionists answered phones, even how quickly the lobby was cleaned after a crowd left. Sometimes Maria wondered if he had once worked in the hotel business himself. Maybe he had been a manager in the past and couldn't let go of old habits. That would explain his observant nature. Still, it was only a guess. Despite his quiet behavior, Mr. James never gave anyone a hard time. He wasn't rude or demanding. He treated staff politely, thanked them for little things, and always kept his room tidy. Housekeeping even joked that he made their job easier because his room hardly looked used when he checked out. But Maria felt her curiosity grow stronger. One evening, when the lobby was calm, he stopped by the desk again. "Busy day?" he asked, his voice carrying that same gentle tone. Maria smiled. "Always busy, but it keeps things interesting." He chuckled lightly, a sound that was rare from him. "I suppose it does." Encouraged by his friendliness, Maria added, "You visit us often. Do you travel here for work?" He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing how much to share, then answered, "Something like that. I come here often to see how things are." His words were vague, but Maria didn't push further. She respected people's privacy, and he seemed like the type who only revealed what he wanted. Still, the conversation stayed in her mind. To see how things are. What did that mean? He didn't behave like a businessman meeting clients. He didn't carry files or laptops. He didn't even look like a tourist. Yet, his presence carried a sense of purpose that Maria couldn't explain. The more she thought about it, the more she began noticing little quirks in his routine. For example, he often asked questions that other guests never bothered with. One morning, he asked Maria how many guests usually checked in during weekends compared to weekdays. Another time, he asked how long she had worked there and whether staff turnover was high. These weren't the questions of a lonely traveler making small talk. They sounded more like the questions of someone studying the hotel closely. Maria tried to answer politely each time, though she couldn't help feeling curious about why these details mattered to him. One afternoon, she saw him seated in the restaurant. Instead of focusing on his meal, his eyes wandered. He observed how the waiters carried trays, how quickly they cleaned tables, and even how they interacted with guests. From her desk, Maria caught him scribbling something into a small notebook he carried. The sight surprised her. She had never seen a guest write notes about the hotel before. When she mentioned this casually to her colleague Anna later, Anna laughed. "Maybe he's writing a travel blog," she suggested. "Some people review every place they stay." Maria nodded, though she wasn't convinced. Mr. James didn't strike her as the type who spent time posting reviews online. He didn't even seem interested in technology. He was one of the few guests she never saw glued to a phone. His attention was always on people, never on screens. The mystery only deepened one rainy night when the lobby was almost empty. Maria was closing out her paperwork when he approached the desk. "You must get tired after long hours," he said kindly. She smiled. "Sometimes, but it's part of the job." He leaned slightly closer, his voice lowering in a thoughtful tone. "It's not easy, dealing with all kinds of guests. But you handle it well. I've watched how patient you are, even with the difficult ones." Maria blinked in surprise. His words warmed her, but they also reminded her again of how much he noticed. Most guests barely paid attention to the receptionist beyond their own needs. Yet here he was, complimenting her professionalism as though he had been evaluating her. Before she could thank him, he gave a small nod and walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers. In the days that followed, Maria found herself thinking about him more often. Not in a romantic way, but in a curious, thoughtful way. Who was this man who appeared so ordinary, yet seemed to study everything so carefully? Why did he always come back to this particular hotel when he could easily choose another? Her curiosity grew stronger when she overheard two staff members talking near the break room. "That old man's back again," one said. "He doesn't do much, does he?" "Yeah," the other replied. "But have you noticed how he watches everything? It's almost like he's checking up on us." Maria stayed quiet, pretending not to listen, but their words echoed her own thoughts. Could it be true? Was he watching them for some reason? If so, why? The more she observed him, the more she realized he wasn't just passing time. Every movement of his eyes, Every quiet question, every note in his little book, it all suggested that Mr. James had a purpose far beyond just being a guest. And yet, to everyone else, he remained invisible. Staff brushed him off as a harmless old man. Guests hardly noticed him at all. Only Maria seemed to sense that there was more to his story. She still told herself he was just a lonely customer, someone who found comfort in the bustle of the hotel lobby. But deep inside, a small voice whispered that she was wrong, that he wasn't here simply to fill his time. Something about him carried a hidden weight, a secret reason for his constant returns. Maria didn't know it yet, but her curiosity was leading her closer to a truth that would soon surprise not only her, but everyone who worked in the hotel. The days at the hotel always followed a rhythm: guests arriving, phones ringing, suitcases rolling across the lobby floor, and staff hurrying to keep everything in order. For Maria, that rhythm was familiar and comforting. She could almost predict what each part of her day would look like. But whenever Mr. James was around, something about that rhythm felt different. He didn't disturb the flow of things. In fact, he blended in so easily that most people forgot he was even there. But Maria noticed how his quiet presence seemed to linger in the background, like a shadow that saw everything. One late afternoon, when the lobby was calm and most guests were out sightseeing, Maria saw him seated in his usual spot. The soft golden light from the setting sun spilled through the tall windows, and it fell gently on his face. He sat with a notebook on his lap, a pen resting between his fingers. His eyes weren't on the page, though. They were on the staff. Maria, curious as always, tried to focus on her work, but she couldn't help glancing at him now and then. He wasn't writing continuously. Instead, he seemed to watch something: a waiter carrying a tray, the bellboy helping a guest, and then quietly jot down a few words. Finally, when the lobby grew almost empty, he closed the notebook and stood up. Instead of heading straight to his room, he walked toward the reception desk. "You look thoughtful today," he said softly, noticing Maria's curious expression. She gave a small laugh. "Just trying to keep up with everything." He leaned against the counter lightly. "You handle a lot here. Receptionists see the best and the worst of people, don't they?" Maria tilted her head, surprised again by his words. "I suppose we do. Some guests are wonderful, some, not so much." He smiled faintly. "And yet, you stay calm with all of them. That takes patience." She felt her cheeks warm slightly. "Thank you, sir. It's just part of the job." For a moment, he studied her with a thoughtful look, then asked, "Do you enjoy talking to guests?" "Yes," she replied honestly. "Sometimes it feels like I'm the first person they meet when they arrive tired, and maybe the last before they leave. A kind word can change their whole experience. I try to remember that." Something in her answer seemed to please him. He gave a small nod, then said, "That's exactly what makes a difference." Maria wanted to ask what he meant by that, but before she could, a group of new guests arrived, dragging suitcases and asking questions all at once. Mr. James stepped aside politely, letting her get back to work. By the time she was free again, he had already gone back to his room. That conversation, short as it was, stayed with Maria. His words felt more than casual. They felt like observations from someone who understood the importance of small acts in hospitality. She wondered again, had he worked in hotels before? Was he once a manager or owner of a small inn? A few days later, the chance for a longer conversation came. It was a quiet evening, with only a few guests in the lobby. Mr. James sat nearby, and Maria, finishing her paperwork, found herself humming softly under her breath. He noticed and smiled. "That's a nice tune," he said. Maria laughed lightly. "Oh, I didn't realize I was humming. It's just something I do when the lobby is too quiet." "It suits you," he replied kindly. Then, after a pause, he asked, Tell me, what do you find hardest about working here? Maria blinked at the question. Guests usually asked about tourist spots or restaurants, not about her feelings toward her job. But something in his gentle expression encouraged her to answer honestly. Sometimes, she began carefully, it's dealing with the pressure. Guests expect everything to be perfect, and if something goes wrong, even something small, they can get very upset. We try our best, but it's not always easy. He nodded slowly. Yes. Hospitality is about making people feel cared for, even when things aren't perfect. The smallest mistake can feel big to a guest. Maria tilted her head. You sound like you've worked in this business before. For the first time, his eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite read. He gave a small smile and replied, I know a little about it. Then he smoothly changed the subject, asking her about her hometown and family. Maria answered politely, but inside, her curiosity only grew. He knows a little about it? His choice of words made her even more certain that his connection to hotels went deeper than he let on. The following week, Maria noticed more signs. He asked another staff member how long the hotel had been operating. He asked the restaurant supervisor how often menus were updated. These weren't the casual questions of a bored traveler. They were the questions of someone who cared about the inner workings of the place. One evening, Maria saw him watching the cleaning staff as they polished the lobby floor. He stood quietly in a corner, arms folded, observing not just the cleanliness but also how quickly they finished and how polite they were to passing guests. Strange man, one of the bellboys whispered later. He acts like he's the inspector of this place. Maria laughed but didn't disagree. In her heart, she felt the same. Still, there was nothing unfriendly about him. His quiet nature seemed to come with genuine kindness. If he asked questions, he did so with respect, never with arrogance. Maria found herself looking forward to those quiet conversations. Sometimes, while she worked, she would imagine what his story could be. Perhaps he had owned a small hotel in another city, one that closed down, and now he traveled to see how others managed theirs. Or maybe he once worked in hospitality and couldn't let go of old habits. But another part of her wondered if he might simply be a lonely man who found meaning in observing. After all, not everyone traveled with family or friends. Some people just wanted company, even if it came from sitting in a busy lobby. One night, Maria stayed late after her shift to help cover for a colleague. The lobby was almost empty, and the city outside was quiet under the soft glow of streetlights. Mr. James approached the counter, not to check in or ask for anything, but simply to talk. Do you ever think of leaving this job? He asked gently. Maria thought for a moment. Sometimes. But then I remember that I enjoy meeting people. Each day is different. And sometimes, a small thank you from a guest makes all the stress worth it. He listened intently, as though her words were valuable. Then he said, you have the right heart for this work. Not everyone does. Some see it only as a job. But you see it as a way to connect with people. His words touched her more than she expected. No one had ever said that to her before. She felt a quiet sense of pride but also a growing sense of mystery. Why did her simple thoughts matter so much to him? Why did he listen with such care? That night, as Maria walked home, her mind was full of questions. She still believed he was just a regular customer, kind, observant, perhaps lonely, but now she felt certain there was something more behind his calm eyes. She didn't know it then, but the connection she was building with him was quietly leading her toward a truth that would change the way she saw both him and her own place in the hotel forever. The hotel had its share of unexpected mornings, but none compared to the day everything changed. Maria came to work as usual, dressed neatly in her uniform, her hair tied back. The lobby was calm when she arrived, sunlight spilling through the tall glass doors. She set her bag under the desk, straightened her notepad, and smiled as she greeted the first guests of the day. Everything felt routine at least until the manager suddenly appeared, his expression unusually serious. "Everyone, please gather in the staff hall," he announced firmly. His voice carried an urgency that Maria rarely heard from him. The staff exchanged puzzled looks. Meetings usually happened once a week and were scheduled ahead of time. This unplanned gathering made everyone curious, and a little nervous. Maria quickly finished with the guest at the counter and followed her colleagues down the hall. The room filled with murmurs as waiters, housekeepers, bellboys, and receptionists took their seats. Maria noticed how restless people looked. Some whispered that maybe a guest had filed a complaint. Others guessed that perhaps new rules were being introduced. Then the manager walked to the front. Beside him stood someone familiar, Mr. James. Maria's eyes widened. She blinked, half convinced she was imagining things. What was he doing there, standing with the manager, looking calm but somehow more important than ever? The manager cleared his throat. "I've called this meeting because there's something you all need to know," he began. His eyes swept across the staff, landing on each of them for a moment. "For some time now, a man has been staying here on and off. Some of you may recognize him." He gestured toward Mr. James. Heads turned. A few whispered quietly, "Oh, it's him, the quiet old man who sits in the lobby." The manager continued. "What you don't know is that Mr. James isn't just a guest. He is the actual owner of this hotel." For a moment, silence hung in the air. The words seemed almost unreal. Maria felt her heart leap as if someone had pulled the floor from under her feet. Owner. The man she had thought of as just a lonely customer was the one who owned the very place she worked. Gasps spread across the room. Some staff members straightened in their seats. Others exchanged shocked glances. The manager went on, "Mr. James has been visiting us quietly for months, staying incognito. He wanted to see this hotel not from the top office, but from the ground. He wanted to experience it as a guest, to see how you work when you don't know the owner is watching." All at once, the puzzle pieces began to fit together in Maria's mind. His careful observations, his strange questions, the way he studied everything, it all made sense now. He hadn't been lonely. He hadn't been passing time. He had been evaluating. Watching. Learning. Maria's cheeks warmed as memories flooded back, his gentle questions about whether she enjoyed her job, his compliments about her patience, the way he had listened so carefully. She realized that all along, her words hadn't just been polite small talk, they had been noticed, remembered, perhaps even valued by the man who ran the entire hotel. Mr. James stepped forward then, his calm presence filling the room. "I want to thank all of you," he said. His voice was steady but kind. "This hotel is not just walls and rooms. It is made alive by the people who work here, by all of you." The staff listened in respectful silence. "When I bought this place," he continued, "I promised myself I would never run it from behind a desk. Numbers and reports can only tell part of the story. I wanted to see it through the eyes of the people who make it work and the guests who stay here. That is why I came quietly, as just another customer." He paused, his eyes moving slowly across the faces in the room. When they met Maria's, for the briefest moment, she felt her chest tighten. His gaze held a glimmer of recognition, almost as if he remembered every conversation they had shared. "I saw many things," he went on. "I saw mistakes, yes. But I also saw dedication. I saw staff who worked hard even when no one was watching. And I saw kindness, small gestures that cost nothing but mean everything to the guests." Maria's heart beat faster. She knew exactly what he meant, though he hadn't named anyone. The manager then explained that Mr. James would soon be making improvements to the hotel, changes in training, facilities, and staff benefits. But more importantly, he said that the owner valued honesty and heart in his team above everything else. When the meeting ended, staff left buzzing with whispers. Some were shocked, others nervous, and a few even excited. "Can you believe it?" one waiter said. "All this time, he was watching us." Maria stayed quiet, still processing the revelation. She walked slowly back to the lobby, her thoughts swirling. Every moment she had spent wondering about him now had a new meaning. Later that evening, as the lobby emptied and the city lights twinkled outside, Mr. James approached the front desk once more. This time, Maria looked at him differently, not as a lonely traveler, but as the man who owned the very building she stood in. "Surprised?" he asked gently, noticing the look in her eyes. Maria let out a nervous laugh. "That would be an understatement." He smiled warmly. "I didn't mean to deceive anyone. But sometimes, the only way to truly see is to walk quietly, without a title." She nodded slowly. "I understand now. It explains everything." For a moment, silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Maria felt a mix of pride and disbelief. All along, she had spoken freely to him, without worrying who he was. And somehow, that had been exactly what mattered most. Mr. James leaned a little closer. "You've been kind from the very first day I checked in. You didn't treat me differently because you thought I was important you didn't even know. That sincerity. I don't forget it." Her throat tightened slightly. "I was just doing my job." He shook his head gently. "No. You were doing more than that. A job can be done with duty. But you did it with heart." Maria swallowed, unsure how to respond. She felt humbled, but also proud in a way she couldn't explain. That night, after her shift ended, Maria walked home under the city's glowing streetlights. Her mind replayed the entire day, the shock of the meeting, the revelation, the quiet conversation afterward. She realized she would never look at her work the same way again. The man she had thought was just another guest had turned out to be the very person shaping the future of the hotel. And though the truth had shaken her, it also gave her a new sense of purpose. Because now she knew that even when she thought no one important was watching, someone was. And her kindness had not gone unnoticed. After the revelation, nothing at the hotel felt the same. The staff looked at Mr. James with new eyes, no longer seeing just a quiet guest but the very man who held the future of the place in his hands. At first, some were nervous, worried that every small mistake might be noticed now that they knew who he really was. Others felt excited, proud that their efforts had been seen by the owner himself. For Maria, the change was more personal. She found herself replaying every conversation they had shared. She remembered the times she thought he was lonely, the moments she tried to cheer him with small kindness, and the evenings when his thoughtful words had stayed with her. What had seemed like casual encounters were now moments of importance, proof that her simple way of treating people had carried more weight than she ever imagined. The very next week, small changes began appearing around the hotel. New equipment was brought in for the housekeeping staff. The restaurant introduced updated menus, designed not only to please guests but also to make service easier for the waiters. Staff schedules were adjusted to give more rest time, something everyone had quietly wished for. During a staff gathering, the manager explained that all of these decisions had come directly from Mr. James. He had seen the challenges with his own eyes during his quiet visits, and now he was determined to make things better. Maria couldn't help feeling proud. Though she was just one receptionist among many, she knew she had played a part in this. Her honest words during those quiet conversations had perhaps guided some of his decisions. She remembered the night she told him how hard it was to keep guests happy when even the smallest mistake could upset them. She remembered explaining how kindness mattered more than rules sometimes. Now she saw those ideas reflected in the way he shaped the hotel's future. But beyond the changes in policy, what touched Maria most was how Mr. James continued to treat her. He didn't suddenly act distant or superior now that his identity was known. If anything, he grew warmer. Each time he stayed at the hotel, he greeted her with the same gentle smile, but now his words carried a deeper sense of respect. One morning, as she handed him his key card, he said, "You know, Maria, you remind me why I started in this business. It was never about buildings or profit, it was about people." Her heart warmed at his words. "I'm glad I could help remind you of that," she said softly. He gave a small chuckle. "More than help, you proved it with your actions." Over time, the staff grew more comfortable around him. The fear of being judged faded, replaced by admiration. They realized he wasn't there to criticize but to understand. His quiet presence in the lobby no longer seemed mysterious. Instead, it became a reminder that every effort, no matter how small, could be noticed by someone who truly cared. Maria, however, felt the impact most deeply. Before, she had seen her job as just a way to earn a living. She had always been polite, always kind, but she hadn't thought much beyond the daily routine. After the revelation, she saw everything differently. Each guest who walked through the door wasn't just a name in the computer system. They were individuals carrying their own stories, just as Mr. James had carried his. One rainy evening, much like the night she had first wondered about him, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed. The hotel lights glowed warmly against the gray sky, and guests moved about with umbrellas and damp coats. Maria stood at the desk, watching the bustle of the lobby, and realized she now took pride not only in her work but in being part of something larger. Later that evening, Mr. James approached her again. "Maria," he said gently, "I want you to know something. What you gave me was not just good service. You gave me sincerity. Many people can smile because their job requires it, but you smiled because you cared. That is rare." She felt her throat tighten slightly, touched by the honesty in his words. "Thank you, sir. I never thought it mattered so much." "It matters more than you think," he replied. "It is the heart of hospitality. You may not see it now, but one day you'll understand that such sincerity can change lives, sometimes even more than you realize." Those words stayed with Maria for a long time. She carried them in her heart like a quiet flame, giving her strength during long shifts and busy days. Whenever she felt tired or overlooked, she remembered that the owner of the hotel had noticed her heart, not just her work. As months passed, Maria grew more confident in her role. Guests often left glowing remarks about her kindness in their feedback forms. Some even mentioned her by name, saying how her warm welcome had made their stay more pleasant. The manager began to notice too, and soon Maria found herself trusted with more responsibilities. One day, she was called into the office. The manager smiled as he told her, "Maria, Mr. James has recommended that you be trained for a supervisory role. He believes you have leadership qualities." Her eyes widened in surprise. "Me? A supervisor?" "Yes," the manager confirmed. "Your dedication and sincerity have not gone unnoticed." Maria left the office with her heart racing. She thought back to the very first day she had seen Mr. James sitting quietly in the lobby, the day she assumed he was simply a lonely man. She could never have guessed then that the same man would later change the course of her life. Though she remained humble, Maria carried herself differently after that. She walked with a new sense of purpose, knowing that her kindness had led her to opportunities she never dreamed of. And every time she saw Mr. James, whether he was sitting quietly in the lobby or speaking with staff, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had taught her a lesson she would never forget, that true value lies not in appearances but in sincerity, and that even small acts of kindness can reach further than one imagines. Years later, Maria would look back on those days with a smile. She would remember the man who everyone thought was just another guest, and how he turned out to be the very soul behind the hotel. She would remember how her simple actions had touched someone powerful, and how that in turn had transformed her own path. And she would always remember the truth she had learned, that no gesture of kindness is ever wasted, because you never truly know who is watching, or how deeply your actions might matter.